Have you ever believed that silence meant weakness? That pulling away was a sign you lost? That if you're not posting, texting, explaining, then somehow you've disappeared into irrelevance? That's the lie we've been told. That's the trap. But what if I told you silence wasn't the end? It was the beginning. A beginning that didn't scream for attention but whispered transformation. Because here's the truth. The most terrifying thing to someone who once had power over your emotions isn't your words, it's your stillness. Not just going quiet, but staying quiet. Let's face it, most people aren't scared when you walk away. They're scared when you stop looking back. They're not afraid of your silence, until it becomes a mirror they can't bear to look into. And when that silence turns into peace, and peace turns into power, they panic. Because now you're not missing. You're evolving. Think about it. How often do we confuse chaos with love? We think if there's no noise, no drama, then there's nothing real. But here's the paradox. It's not the noise that matters, it's what happens after it. Silence is not surrender. It's strategy. In Stoic Relationships, silence is the moment you return to yourself. It's the battlefield going quiet before the victor rises. So let's crush the common misconceptions right now. Silence isn't weakness, closure isn't a conversation, and peace doesn't mean you're numb. If anything, silence is when your rebirth begins. And that's exactly why they panic. Because they expected you to pause, not to level up. They thought you'd circle back, not disappear into your own strength. They thought the game was on pause. They didn't know it was over. And now you have a choice. Do you keep playing a role in someone else's play? Or do you walk off the stage and write your own story? Are you ready to stop performing? Are you ready to glow without needing anyone to notice? Are you ready to rise not out of revenge, but out of stoicism? Then stay right here. Because this video isn't just another motivational clip. It's a transformation. It's a mirror. It's the blueprint for becoming emotionally untouchable. And by the end, you'll understand why silence was just step one. What comes next? That's what they weren't ready for. Let's go deeper. 1. When silence becomes a pattern, not a pause. They expected you to pause, not vanish. To retreat for a moment, sure, but not for good. You see, they were counting on a familiar script, one they had seen you perform a dozen times before. A few days of silence, then a hesitant hey, a breadcrumb of affection, a deep late-night text laced with vulnerability. They were ready for that. They were waiting for the moment you'd come crawling back with your heart still bruised, but wide open, asking if there was still something left to fight for. That's what they believed silence was, a performance, not a statement. A tantrum, not a transition. But what they didn't see coming was your stillness turning into strength. They thought silence was temporary, a stall in the story. But this wasn't a pause. This was a decision. A turning point. The moment you stopped performing, explaining, hoping. The moment you went quiet, and stayed quiet. Not out of manipulation, not to punish, but because you had nothing more to give. You weren't being dramatic. You were done. There's something primal in that kind of silence. Something powerful. And when it stretches long enough, it forces them to confront something far more unsettling than any loud goodbye, the absence of your energy. This is the part where panic begins. Not when they stop hearing from you, but when they realize you're no longer listening for them either. When silence stops being a pause and becomes your new rhythm, your new way of life, that's when their mind starts playing tricks. Because they were used to the noise. The late-night messages, the online presence, the subtle posts that meant, "I'm still here." They took your emotional labor for granted. You were always the bridge, always the reacher, always the one holding it together even when they didn't notice. And now that bridge is gone. No explosion, no warning, just gone. And they don't know how to cross the gap without it. Have you noticed how quiet can become loud when it lingers too long? At first, your silence is convenient. They tell themselves you're sulking, being dramatic. They assume you'll get over it. But days pass. Then weeks. No message. No like. No view. No sign. And suddenly, the silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's screaming. They can't read you, can't gauge you, can't access you. And not knowing what you feel, not knowing where you are emotionally, that's what terrifies them. Because as long as you reacted, they had control. But now you're not watching your phone. You're not hoping they'll check in. You've stopped performing. That's when they start asking questions. Not out loud. Not to you. But to themselves. Did I lose them for good? Have they moved on? Why aren't they reaching out? These questions grow louder than any confrontation. Because your silence isn't passive. It's full of meaning. And for the first time, they realize you're not just gone. You're peaceful. And peace is the one thing they can't touch, can't interrupt, can't manipulate. This is what Stoicism teaches us, that silence is not retreat, it's control. Not suppression, but sovereignty. When you withdraw without bitterness, when you disengage without warning, you reclaim all the energy they used to waste. They panic because you've become unpredictable. They had you pegged. Emotional. Reactive. Needy. You were supposed to break. You were supposed to text. You were supposed to feel lost without them. And instead, you're unbothered. Grounded. Focused. Evolving. Do you feel that shift in yourself? That internal calm that used to feel foreign, but now feels like home? That's not numbness. That's growth. That's you finally choosing not to bleed for someone who wouldn't hand you a bandage. That's the beginning of your transformation. Here's a question. How many times did you stay accessible, thinking availability would be the thing that proved your love? How many times did you believe being loud was the only way to be heard? But now you know better. You've learned the wisdom of stillness. In Stoic Relationships, silence doesn't mean absence. It means presence with yourself. It means putting down the megaphone and picking up the mirror. It means asking, "What do I need?" instead of, "What do they want?" And when you start honoring that voice, your own voice, they notice. Not because you told them, but because they feel the emptiness where your presence used to be. They'll test the silence, you know. Hey. A story view? A vague post that screams, "Look at me." And you'll feel the tug. The temptation to explain, to reassure, to step back into the emotional arena. But don't. Because silence isn't just absence, it's evidence. Evidence that you've outgrown the emotional games. Evidence that you no longer place your peace in someone else's inconsistency. You're not being cold. You're being clear. And clarity is what they can't handle. They thrived in your confusion. They fed off your uncertainty. They needed you to question everything, so they never had to answer anything. But your silence? It's a boundary now. One they can't step over. And maybe the hardest part is that at first, the silence hurts. Let's be honest. You miss them. You rehearse old conversations in your mind. You draft messages you never send. You wonder if they're thinking of you too. That's normal. That's part of the detox. Emotional habits die hard. But each day you remain silent is a day you reclaim your emotional power. Each unanswered urge becomes a brick in the new foundation you're building. And one day, you wake up and realize, you're not just staying silent. You're staying whole. That's the part they never prepared for. They didn't think you'd make it this far without them. They underestimated your strength, your growth, your willingness to sit in discomfort rather than run back to a broken dynamic. And now that they see you're not speaking, they panic. Not because they missed the sound of your voice, but because they lost access to your energy, your light, your love, your attention. And let's be clear, people don't value what's always available. They value what's hard to reach. And your silence? That's the distance they now can't cross. Ask yourself, who am I becoming in this silence? What am I discovering about myself when I'm not performing for love? When I'm not chasing validation? When I'm not overextending to prove my worth? Because those answers, they're your real power. They're what make your silence not just a strategy, but a sanctuary. A declaration that you are done explaining, done waiting, done suffering for someone who only showed up when it was convenient. In Stoic relationships, the most powerful move is not to argue, not to block, not to explode. It's to say nothing. To choose peace over proof. To let silence speak for you. Because silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom. And wisdom doesn't beg. It watches. It observes. It acts when necessary, and only then. Your silence isn't revenge. It's revelation. A quiet unveiling of who you were always meant to be, before they broke your trust, before they dimmed your light, before they made you believe you had to shout to be heard. So now here you are. Present. Still. Unmoved. And they're left with the questions you'll never answer. The apology you no longer need. The closure they thought they could withhold like leverage. But you've reclaimed your power not by fighting, but by refusing to. And that refusal? That's the beginning of their panic. Because you didn't go silent to be petty. You went silent to be free. 2. When peace replaces pain. They were never afraid of your heartbreak. They were never shaken by your tears or long messages or emotional calls in the middle of the night. They were prepared for your pain, because they depended on it. They knew how to respond to it, how to manipulate it, how to silence it just long enough to keep you around. But what they never expected was peace. You see, peace doesn't beg. Peace doesn't chase. Peace doesn't keep knocking on doors that never opened. And that's what rattled them to the core, not your suffering, but your stillness. There comes a moment in every healing journey when the crying stops. When you stop needing answers. When the storm inside you dies down, not because you're numb, but because you've finally made peace with what you cannot control. That's when everything changes. That's when the one who was once lost becomes grounded. The one who once broke becomes unbreakable. And the one who once clung becomes complete. That moment? That's what makes them panic. Because they didn't fall for the calm version of you. They fell for the one who bled emotion. The one who sent texts at 1 a.m. needing reassurance. The one who forgave without apology. Who stayed without being chosen. Who showed up even when they disappeared. They fed on your chaos. They found comfort in your confusion. Every breakdown was proof to them that you still cared. Every overreaction, every "Can we talk?" text was a reminder that they still mattered in your emotional universe. But then, silence. Stillness. Not the silence of resentment, but the silence of release. You didn't go quiet to punish. You went quiet because you had nothing left to say. And more importantly, because you didn't need them to say anything anymore. Here's the thing, when someone's used to controlling your emotions, your peace becomes a declaration of war. It says, "I no longer need your validation to feel whole." It says, "I found clarity without your explanation." And for someone who relied on your emotional chaos to feel superior, to feel needed, to feel wanted, your serenity is terrifying. Because now they're no longer in charge of how you feel. They can't make you spiral with silence. They can't drag you back with breadcrumbs. They can't distract you with a half-hearted apology and expect you to collapse into their arms. Ask yourself, why is peace so uncomfortable at first? Why does it feel unfamiliar when we first step into it? Because when you've been living in survival mode for so long, chaos becomes your default. You confuse intensity with intimacy. You think anxiety is love. So when peace arrives, your nervous system goes into shock. You question it. Am I just numb? Should I feel more than this? But that's not numbness. That's clarity. That's you detoxing from dysfunction. In Stoic relationships, peace is the ultimate goal, not drama, not passion, not obsession. Peace is what you work toward, not what you run from. It's what you protect at all costs. And when someone sees that you've chosen peace over pain, they know they can't reach you anymore with the tools that once worked. You're no longer available for games, for cycles, for false starts. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're simply unavailable. And that unavailability, wrapped in quiet confidence, wrapped in healed energy, that's what sends them spiraling. They'll try to provoke you. Maybe they'll post pictures with someone new. Maybe they'll send a, "Hey, hope you're good," text out of nowhere. Maybe they'll even act like they've found peace too. But if you look closely, you'll see it's not peace, it's pretense. It's performance. Because peace isn't loud. It doesn't have to prove anything. It doesn't scream, "Look at me, I'm fine." It whispers, "I don't need to be seen to be okay." And what's even more powerful than your peace? The fact that you found it on your own. You didn't find peace in a rebound. You didn't find it in distraction. You didn't find it in being better off without them. You found it in stillness, in solitude, in the space where their voice used to echo. And now that space is filled with your voice, with your purpose, with your presence. That's what scares them. Because now they're irrelevant, not because you pushed them out, but because they no longer fit. Ask yourself, how do you respond when your peace is challenged? Do you explain yourself? Do you revert back to old patterns? Or do you stay grounded? Because that's what peace truly is, not a feeling, but a commitment. A commitment to no longer abandon yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. And in Stoicism, that kind of peace is sacred. It's not reactive. It's not conditional. It's not situational. It's internal. And once you taste that kind of peace, chaos loses its appeal. Drama feels exhausting. Games feel beneath you. And they feel that shift. Trust me, they do. They may not say it. They may never admit it. But they feel the void. They feel the distance. They feel the power you reclaimed the moment you stopped needing them to validate your worth. And they don't know how to handle that. Because they were the sun in your world. And now, they're not even a shadow. You're not watching their stories. You're not refreshing their page. You're not waiting for an apology. You're not even curious anymore. And that silence? That stillness? It's louder than any "I miss you" text you could have sent. It says everything. It says, "I healed without your help." It says, "You were not my source of happiness. I was." And that realization, that you never needed them to begin with, is the dagger they never expected. Now let's get real. It's not always easy. Some days you'll want to break the silence. Some days you'll feel the ache again. That's normal. That's healing. It's not linear. But the difference now is, you don't react from that ache. You sit with it. You breathe through it. You let it pass. Because your peace is not negotiable. You've earned it. And no one, not even the person who once meant the world to you, has the right to take it away. You're glowing different now. You're walking different. You speak with intention. You don't overshare. You don't over-explain. You're not trying to prove your growth. You embody it. You radiate it. People notice. And yes, they notice too. Even if they never tell you, even if they pretend not to care, they feel it. They see it. And it haunts them. Because now you're not the same person. You're wiser. Stronger. Quieter. More whole. You've outgrown the drama. You've evolved past the pain. And your peace? That's the proof. That's what they lost. Not just you, but the chance to grow with you. And that loss? That's permanent. So if you've ever questioned whether staying silent and choosing peace was the right move, let this be your confirmation. Yes. Absolutely yes. You did the hard thing. You walked away when it would have been easier to stay. You let go when your heart still wanted to hold on. You chose yourself. And in a world full of emotional chaos, that choice makes you untouchable. Now, if you felt something during this part of the journey, if this hit home for you in any way, like this video and comment, number 1, below to let me know this part of the story spoke to your soul. And if you're walking your own path toward peace, and you never want to go back to the version of yourself that suffered for someone else's comfort, subscribe right now. Because we're not done. Not even close. In fact, the next part, that's where the glow-up really begins. And trust me, they're not ready for what comes next. But you will be. 3. When you no longer perform for love. You were the one who kept the story going. The invisible architect of every connection. The silent effort behind every we. You didn't ask for applause. You weren't trying to win awards. But make no mistake, you were performing. Performing stability, performing hope, performing belief in a future that they only half-heartedly participated in. Every check-in, every thoughtful gesture, every just making sure you're okay text, it was part of the show. And you did it so well they forgot you were carrying the weight alone. But then something shifted. You didn't slam the door. You didn't deliver a dramatic monologue. You just stopped performing. And in that stillness, everything they thought was solid began to crumble. Because you weren't just a partner. You were the engine, the glue, the soul. They didn't realize how much you held together until you laid it all down. And suddenly, the warmth disappeared. The rhythm faltered. The familiar comfort they never had to work for evaporated. They weren't confused. They were exposed. Exposed to a reality they refused to see while you were busy tap dancing through disappointment and patching holes in the connection with your loyalty. Here's the hard truth. They weren't in love with you. They were in love with your performance. With how you made them feel. With how easy you made things for them. Your ability to regulate the emotional temperature, to pick up the slack when they withdrew, to apologize first even when they were wrong, that was the role they gave you. And you played it beautifully, didn't you? You convinced yourself that your effort would one day be matched. That your selflessness would eventually be appreciated. That if you just stayed long enough, loved hard enough, they'd finally wake up and see you. But they never clapped, did they? Never truly saw the work. Because when someone grows used to your emotional labor, they stop viewing it as labor at all. It becomes background noise. Expected. Unacknowledged. Unreciprocated. And the moment you stop, that's when the theater goes dark. That's when the silence becomes deafening. That's when they look around and realize they never learned their lines. Because they didn't have to. You were the script, the director, the lighting, the applause. And now, without your performance, they're left alone on stage, unprepared, unequipped, and entirely exposed. Ask yourself, how many times did you make it easy for them to stay comfortable? How often did you dim your needs so theirs could shine brighter? How much of your self-worth was invested in keeping things together that were never built with mutual effort? You see, this isn't just about actions. This is about energy. You were overfunctioning. And in Stoic relationships, overfunctioning is a form of self-betrayal. It's abandoning your own center to keep the other person emotionally afloat. It feels noble. But in truth, it's exhausting. It's unsustainable. It's a slow erasure of who you really are. When you stop performing, they panic. Not because they miss the real you, but because they miss the version of you that made their life easier. The one who buffered their chaos, who absorbed their coldness, who softened their cruelty with compassion. The one who made their laziness look like effort. And when you step out of that role, their illusion collapses. Because now, they have to face themselves. And they don't like what they see without your energy shielding them from their own inadequacies. This is the moment where everything flips. You're no longer explaining. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer auditioning for a role in a relationship that never deserved your performance to begin with. You step off the stage and walk out the back door with your dignity intact. And as you leave, you realize something groundbreaking. Love should never require a performance. Love, real love, shows up without scripts. It doesn't need direction. It doesn't wait for cues. It simply is. It breathes, it gives, it listens, it stands shoulder to shoulder with you, not watching from the audience. And yes, walking away from the stage is hard. Especially when it's the only thing you've known. Especially when your identity became so wrapped up in being the caretaker, the nurturer, the peacekeeper. But once the lights dim, once the applause fades, you begin to hear something else, your own voice. The one that was drowned out by the noise of needing to be needed. The one that whispers, "You don't have to perform to be worthy." That's the voice of Stoicism calling you home. Back to your center. Back to your power. They will test your silence. Don't doubt it. A subtle reach out. A memory trigger. A post designed to remind you of the old roles. They want to see if the performance is really over. But you don't answer. Not because you're playing games, but because you're not playing at all anymore. You've stepped out of the fantasy. You've stopped spinning the storyline. You no longer need to be the emotional bridge between their indifference and your connection. That bridge has burned. And for the first time, you're not trying to rebuild it. You're walking away as it crumbles behind you. This is where your peace deepens. Where your silence isn't just the absence of noise, but the presence of purpose. You're no longer entertaining people who only clapped when they benefited. You're no longer throwing energy into black holes and calling it devotion. You're no longer applauding people who never showed up for your show. Now you're building a different kind of stage. One where your needs aren't dismissed. One where your voice is not an afterthought. One where love is mutual, not transactional. Ask yourself this, and be honest, who are you performing for? Who did you become to keep that relationship alive? And most importantly, who are you becoming now that the performance has ended? Because the person you are now, they don't chase applause. They don't bend to fit into someone else's narrative. They walk with integrity. They move with quiet confidence. And most importantly, they choose authenticity over acceptance. They don't twist themselves into roles to be loved. They simply are. You're not here to be someone's convenience. You're not here to play the role of fixer, feeler, savior. You're here to be seen. To be met. To be cherished for who you truly are, not the version of you that fits someone else's comfort zone. And the people who can't see you that way, they were never your audience. They were never your people. And they don't get front row seats in your new chapter. Because here's what most people don't understand. When the performer becomes the observer, everything changes. You start to see who was truly invested, and who was just enjoying the show. And as painful as it may be to realize who never clapped, it's also liberating. Because now you're free. Free to rewrite the story. Free to step into relationships that don't demand sacrifice as proof of love. Free to stop equating effort with worth. That's what Stoicism teaches us. Real power doesn't need permission to exist. It simply stands. So when they panic, and they will, it won't be because they miss the chaos. It will be because they finally understand what your energy meant. What your presence did. What your silence now declares. You're not playing the role anymore. You've retired the mask. And in doing so, you've taken back the one thing they never expected you to claim, your peace. 4. When you don't need closure anymore. They always thought you'd come back for answers. That was their last piece of leverage. Not love. Not apology. Just confusion. They used it like a rope, wrapped tight around your mind, fraying at the ends but strong enough to keep you orbiting. Because they knew you would stay, not for the comfort, but for the conclusion. They knew you weren't the type to walk away without understanding why. And for a while, they were right. You waited. You stayed in the unresolved. You carried the weight of all the almosts, and maybes, and what ifs. You kept replaying conversations, dissecting the silences, translating mixed signals into emotional hieroglyphics. You weren't waiting for them, you were waiting for meaning. But then something changed. Something snapped inside you, not with rage, but with clarity. You didn't need an ending written by them. You decided to write your own. And that's when they panicked. Because people who avoid closure don't do it by accident. They do it to control the narrative. They leave the door cracked just enough for you to wonder. They give half answers, vague replies, delayed responses, not because they're confused, but because they want you to be. A confused heart keeps checking back. A confused heart sends, "I just want to talk" messages. A confused heart stays stuck. But when you stop needing clarity from the one who caused the chaos, that's when they lost their grip. Because now they're not the narrator anymore. You are. Closure is one of the most misunderstood concepts in emotional healing. We think it's a conversation, a mutual understanding, a final exchange where all the puzzle pieces fall into place. But more often than not, closure never arrives like that. It doesn't come with a tidy explanation or a mutual resolution. Closure, real closure, is a choice. A solitary, unglamorous, deeply powerful decision to stop needing validation from the person who fractured your peace to begin with. Ask yourself, how many nights did you lie awake wondering, why? How many times did you think, if they could just explain what changed, maybe I could let go? That loop, that cycle, is what they counted on. Not because they had answers, but because they knew you were still emotionally tied to them. But here's the truth, grounded in Stoicism: anyone who truly values you does not leave you confused. Confusion is not love. It's not care. It's not connection. It's control. And the moment you outgrow your need for closure, you become uncontrollable. They never expected that. They expected you to knock on that open door forever. They thought your questions would keep you coming back. They didn't realize that silence was not your surrender, it was your strength recalibrating. They didn't know that every unanswered message was building your tolerance for self-trust. They didn't understand that by ghosting you, by withholding clarity, they were doing you a favor. They were showing you who they really were. And eventually you saw it. Not because they told you, but because their absence told the truth more loudly than their words ever could. Here's a brutal question, but it's one worth asking. What if the closure you're waiting for is just another delay tactic? What if the real healing begins not with understanding them, but with understanding why you ever believed they owed you that much? Because the longer you wait for closure from someone who was careless with your heart, the longer you remain stuck in a story that wasn't even written in your favor. And the moment you stop waiting, that's the moment your story begins to shift. This isn't about bitterness. This is about freedom. This is about realizing that closure doesn't have to be mutual to be real. You don't need them to finish the sentence. You don't need them to connect the dots. You already know the truth. You just didn't want to accept it. But now you've stopped begging for sense in a situation built on selfishness. Now you've stopped explaining your hurt to someone who never showed up to understand it. And now your silence isn't just the absence of conversation, it's the presence of self-respect. They will feel that shift. Don't be fooled by their calm exterior. Don't assume their indifference means they're unaffected. They notice. They notice when your texts stop. They notice when you stop trying to fix what they broke. They notice when you don't show up the way you used to. They notice when the emotional leash they held goes slack and you walk away untethered. And that's when the panic creeps in. Not because they want to repair things, but because they lost the emotional control they once held so easily. They might try to re-engage. A random, "Hope you're okay." A lazy, half-curious check-in. But it's not closure. It's bait. And when you've made peace with not needing their words, their bait tastes like dust. It no longer fuels you. It no longer pulls you back. Because you're no longer operating from emotional starvation. You're full. Not from their love, but from your own acceptance. Your own understanding. Your own ability to say, "I didn't deserve what happened, but I do deserve to heal." This is what Stoic relationships look like. They're not built on endless conversations about the past. They're built on personal accountability. On emotional clarity. On the willingness to say, "Even without closure, I will close this chapter with dignity." Because dignity doesn't need a goodbye. It doesn't need an explanation. It needs a decision. So ask yourself again, what would it look like if you stopped waiting for them to come back and explain everything? What if you dropped the rope, turned around, and walked forward, burning the need for closure in the fire of your own becoming? That's what scares them. That's what flips the story. Because now you're not reacting. You're rewriting. And in the story you're writing, they're not the final page. They're just a chapter. A lesson. A teacher whose curriculum you've outgrown. They didn't expect you to outgrow it. They expected you to stay caught in the web of wondering. But now you're not asking, "Why did they leave?" You're asking, "Why did I stay?" And that question, that pivot in your mind, is the moment your healing accelerates. Because it puts the power back where it belongs, in your hands. You don't need an ending from them. You've become the ending. You've become the answer. You've become the closure. And that, my friend, is why they panic. Now, if this resonates, if you feel the truth of it sinking into your bones, go ahead and like this video and comment, number 1, below so I know you're walking through this chapter with the strength of someone who's writing their own ending. And if you're on this path of healing, clarity, and growth, subscribe right now, because we're building something here. Something grounded in truth, power, and peace. And in the next chapter, you're going to see exactly why your glow-up doesn't need to be seen by them to be felt. Stay with me. 5. When the glow-up happens without them watching. They thought they left you broken, quiet, dimmed. They thought you'd spiral in the silence, that you'd post vague quotes, drop crumbs of pain, and hope they'd notice. They pictured you checking your phone for their name, wondering why they hadn't reached out, replaying every memory like a sad movie. That's the fantasy they clung to, not because they cared about your healing, but because they needed to believe they still mattered in your world. They needed the illusion that your silence was weakness, that your stillness was stagnation. But what they didn't see coming, what they were completely unprepared for, was your evolution. Because while they were watching for signs of your breakdown, you were building. Quietly. Consistently. Without drama, without noise. You weren't spiraling. You were shifting. You were shedding. You were becoming. And the irony? They weren't even there to witness it. That's what eats them up. Not just that you glowed up, but that they didn't get a front row seat. That you transformed without asking for their permission. That your healing didn't perform for the crowd. It happened in silence. In private. In the dark. And it is that darkness, unseen, uninterrupted, that made you unstoppable. You want to know the moment they realized it? It wasn't when you changed your profile picture. It wasn't when you started dressing better or posting more confidently. It wasn't when you started smiling again. It was when none of those things were about them. When your glow wasn't an attempt to make them jealous. When it didn't seek validation. When it didn't invite their gaze. That's when they panicked. Because that's when they saw it wasn't a reaction, it was a rebirth. And not every rebirth needs to be loud. Some happen like a seed buried in silence, growing roots deeper than anyone could imagine. And then, one day, it bursts through the surface. Unapologetic. Unrecognizable. They underestimated your silence. They thought it meant you were stuck. But in Stoicism, we know that silence is never stillness. It's strategy. It's protection. It's the sacred space between destruction and resurrection. While they were off performing for attention, jumping into shallow connections, trying to replace what they never valued, you were rebuilding your core. Your mindset. Your body. Your soul. You weren't just healing. You were ascending. And now? You're out of reach. Not because you blocked them, but because they no longer have access to the frequency you operate on. That's what haunts them. That's what hurts. Because let's be honest. It's not the photos that bother them. It's the energy. It's the way you carry yourself now. You don't beg. You don't chase. You don't explain. You walk like someone who remembers exactly who they are. And when you walk like that, you don't need to scream, "I've moved on." Your energy does the talking. Your peace becomes your proof. And your silence? That becomes the reminder of what they lost. Not someone desperate, but someone divine. Someone they dismissed. Someone they thought was replaceable, until they tried to replace you. And they did try, didn't they? You saw it. Maybe not directly, but you felt it. The speed of their moving on. The subtle digs. The new pictures. The recycled captions. They thought proximity to someone new would erase the space you once filled. They thought new bodies could replace old bonds. But the problem with replacements is this: they don't carry your soul. They don't hold your depth. They don't reflect your light. And eventually, even if they won't admit it, they feel the difference. The hollowness. The way it doesn't land the same. The way nothing quite compares. It doesn't hit them all at once. It creeps in. Quietly. In the middle of a conversation. In the way they laugh but don't feel it. In the silence between words with someone who doesn't know their darkness the way you did. That's when the longing begins. That's when they start retracing steps. Not to return, but to make sense of what they gave up. And here's the cruel twist of it all. By the time they realize the value of your presence, they're no longer worthy of access. You've grown. You've leveled up. Not to prove a point, but because you finally remembered you were never meant to shrink to fit into someone's inability to love deeply. This glow up? It's not petty. It's not revenge. It's sacred. It's personal. It's the natural result of choosing yourself consistently. And they weren't there for that part. They didn't see the nights you had to talk yourself out of sending the text. The mornings where the grief still burned like fire. The moments you doubted if it would ever stop hurting. They didn't see the work. The discipline. The loneliness. The resistance to old patterns. They just saw the result. And that's why it stings. Because they don't get to take credit for any part of who you've become. Now you walk different. You speak different. You think different. Your presence demands respect, not because you're loud, but because you're aligned. And people feel that. Even through a screen. Even through a glance. And whether they admit it or not, they know what they lost. Not in theory. Not in memory. In reality. They scroll, they watch, they wonder. But they say nothing. Because to reach out now would be to confess they never expected you to rise. And their pride is too loud to admit what their soul already knows. You weren't just the best they had. You were the only one who ever truly saw them. But now it's not about them. It's about you. About what you're building. About the peace you're protecting. About the life you're cultivating from the wreckage of what they destroyed. You're not watching their stories anymore. You're writing your own. And it doesn't involve proving anything to anyone who lets you question your worth. Because worth doesn't need validation. It just is. And when you walk in that knowing, you become magnetic, not because you're trying, but because you're free. Let me ask you, what are you doing with your glow up? Are you using it to get attention from the ones who left? Or are you using it to become untouchable in your purpose? Because the real flex isn't looking good, it's feeling grounded. It's waking up and knowing your joy isn't dependent on someone checking in. It's knowing that your peace isn't tied to a phone call that never came. That's real power. That's Stoic relationships at their finest. And those who underestimated you? They don't know how to handle that version of you. Because they never expected you to stop needing them. They never expected you to realize you were always the prize. So now, let them scroll. Let them watch. Let them sit in silence. You don't need to react. You don't need to post. You don't need to play games. You're not dancing for anyone anymore. You're dancing with your own life. And that dance? It's divine. Because it's not about who sees it. It's about how it makes you feel. It's not for show. It's for soul. And maybe the most powerful part of all? You don't even hate them. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just indifferent. You've released the story. You've closed the chapter. And you didn't need their apology to do it. Because your healing wasn't about them, it was about you. And that's what they never prepared for. You became the one who got away. Not because you disappeared, but because you evolved past their reach. You outgrew their narrative. You rewrote your worth. And now you shine without seeking. You glow without proving. You exist without needing. That's the glow up they fear most. The one that doesn't beg to be seen. The one that doesn't need revenge. The one that simply is. 6. When indifference replaces emotion. They were ready for your rage. For the outburst. For the long texts that they wouldn't read but would still save. For the online shade, the dramatic declarations, the emotional performances that made them feel important, even in your pain. That was their comfort zone. You crying over them. You reacting to them. You proving with every ounce of frustration that they still held power over your emotions. That they still mattered. Because anger, as explosive as it is, still means you care. Still means you're watching. Still means they're relevant. But what they didn't expect, what they never saw coming, was the cold, quiet truth of indifference. You stopped reacting. You stopped caring. You didn't scream, you didn't text, you didn't block and unblock. You just went still. And in that stillness, they vanished. Not from your memories. From your emotions. From your concern. That's when the panic set in. Because hate, at least, gives them a role in your story. But apathy? That writes them out completely. There's a moment in healing when the storm ends, not because the weather cleared up, but because you stopped standing outside. You stepped into shelter. Into silence. Into peace. And that's when it gets real. Not just for you, but for them. They scroll through your profile and feel nothing looking back. They test the waters with a vague message, and you don't reply. They say your name in a room hoping for a story, and all they get is silence. That silence isn't passive. It's power. Because they no longer matter enough to disturb your peace. You see, they were never afraid of being hated. They were afraid of being irrelevant. They wanted you to burn. Not so they could watch you suffer, but so they could watch themselves reflected in the flames. Your pain was their proof that you still remembered. That you still missed them. That you were still affected. But when you stopped performing, when you stopped needing to prove anything, when you stopped even noticing their absence, that's when they crumbled. Not outwardly. Quietly. Slowly. But deeply. It's not revenge. It's not strategy. It's evolution. It's the highest form of healing, not giving someone a piece of your mind, but reclaiming every piece of your soul. When you let go of the need to be heard, understood, vindicated, you reach the apex of Stoic detachment. In Stoicism, the power is never in reaction. It's in response. And the most powerful response? Silence. Not silence from pain, but from peace. From growth. From completion. That's what they never expected. Ask yourself this: who are you without the fight? Without the anger? Without the role of the wounded lover, the betrayed friend, the broken heart? You're someone reborn. Not in fire. In calm. Because it's not that you forgot, it's that you remember, and still no longer care. And that, more than anything, terrifies them. Because they don't know how to reach the version of you that doesn't need closure, doesn't seek explanation, doesn't hope for apologies. That version of you, the one who no longer suffers, is unreachable to them. And when someone becomes unreachable, they become unforgettable. Because now, they're not missing you. They're haunted by you. Haunted not by what you said, but what you didn't. Not by what you did, but what you withheld. Your energy. Your attention. Your softness. Your light. And now, all of that is turned inward. And they feel the void like a wind they can't stop. They thought they could live without you. But what they really mean is they thought they could live without being seen by someone like you. And now, all they're left with is their own reflection, and the realization that you no longer reflect back any of their value. And here's where the real beauty begins. Because you no longer feel the urge to correct the story, to post the truth, to tell your side. You're free. Truly free. Not because they let you go, but because you let go of needing them to acknowledge what they did. You stopped waiting for an apology. You stopped needing them to change. You stopped needing justice. You became your own justice. And your peace? That's the sentence they never expected to receive. In Stoic relationships, we don't chase resolution from the ones who caused the confusion. We don't ask the wound to be the cure. We don't expect clarity from people who lied. We rise. Quietly. We release. Permanently. And we keep walking forward, not because we're ignoring the past, but because we finally understand it. We understand that not everyone deserves a second thought, let alone a second chance. That some stories end without a final chapter. And that's okay. Not every book is meant to be reread. They will still test the waters. Not out of hope, but out of habit. A like. A mention. A, "How have you been?" They're not reaching out to reconnect. They're reaching out to see if they still hold space in your heart. But they don't. Not anymore. That room is occupied now. Not by someone else, but by you. By your new peace. Your purpose. Your self-respect. And there's no room left for ghosts. You're no longer interested in being right. You're interested in being real. You're no longer seeking justice. You're seeking joy. You're not performing, proving, or pleading. You're simply being. And that being? It's radiant. It's steady. It's powerful. It's what happens when you stop seeing your past as a place to return to, and instead, as a bridge you burn for your own protection. Let's get even more honest. You don't even hate them anymore. And that's the scariest goodbye of all. Because hate has energy. Hate has fire. Hate is a form of connection. But indifference? That's emotional detachment. That's you removing them from every version of your future. That's you releasing their name from your prayers. That's you not looking back. Not because you're cold, but because you're healed. And healed people don't revisit what broke them to feel strong. They just move forward and never return. This, right here, is the final transformation. Not glowing up for them to see. Not healing to make a statement. Not moving on so they'll regret it. This is about becoming who you were meant to be when no one's watching. When no one claps. When no one cares. Because Stoicism isn't for performance. It's for power. Quiet, unshakable power. And now, you are that power. You are the peace they can't disrupt. The storm they can't outrun. The silence they can't decode. So if this spoke to you, like this video and comment, number 1, down below. Let this be your moment to claim your peace publicly. And if you're done looking back, if you're walking in your new season and refuse to ever settle for less again, subscribe right now. Because what comes next isn't just healing. It's thriving. And they're not ready. But you are. This was never about them. It was always about you. About who you're becoming in the quiet. About what rises after silence. It's the way you began to see yourself again, not through the eyes of someone who took you for granted, but through the mirror of your own worth. That's the shift. That's the revelation. You weren't made to stay broken. You were made to rise. And that rising didn't need to be dramatic or broadcasted. It was subtle, intentional, sacred. Because real transformation happens when no one's watching. You didn't need closure. You didn't need applause. You didn't need revenge. You needed healing. You needed your peace. And that peace? That became your weapon. Not to harm, but to protect. To preserve your energy. To guard your growth. To honor your path. Because when the noise stopped, the truth got loud. The truth that your pain wasn't permanent. That your worth wasn't up for debate. That your love, your presence, your energy, they were never the problem. You just gave them to someone who wasn't ready to receive them. And now here you are. Present. Whole. Not because you got an apology, but because you stopped needing one. That's the real flex. That's the true power. To no longer be defined by what you went through, but by who you became because of it. And who you are now. That person doesn't chase. Doesn't explain. Doesn't beg to be understood. That person stands tall in the stillness. That person embodies Stoicism not as a theory, but as a way of life. They expected a reaction. You gave them release. They expected a meltdown. You gave them maturity. They expected you to collapse. You created clarity. And now, they're stuck in the echo of a version of you that no longer exists. They're still replaying scenes that no longer matter. But you're writing a new script. One where you're not just healing. You're thriving. Not just surviving the past. But shaping a future that has nothing to do with them. And everything to do with who you've chosen to become. This isn't a story of revenge. This is a story of redemption, of evolution, of elevation. You stopped showing up for roles that drained you. You stopped clapping for people who never supported your show. You stopped trying to earn love by performing for it. And now you are loved, not by them, but by the version of you that finally came home to yourself. That version is the true gift of all this. That version is the reward. Look back if you must, but not with longing. With gratitude. Because every unanswered message, every unexplained exit, every quiet heartbreak, it all brought you here. To this clarity. To this power. To this moment where you no longer need to be chosen to feel valuable. You already are. You always were. They just didn't see it. But now you do. And that's enough. Remember this. Every time they try to reach out, every time the memories surface, every time the urge to go back tempts you. You didn't leave out of weakness. You left out of wisdom. You didn't walk away because you were cold. You walked away because you were done bleeding for someone who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. That's the line you crossed. That's the boundary you drew. And you did it for you. This journey was never about changing them. It was about choosing you. Again and again. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Because choosing yourself in the face of abandonment, silence, or betrayal is the highest form of self-respect. It's where the healing begins. It's where the story really starts. And now it's your story. Unapologetic. Unbothered. Unstoppable. They thought they broke you. But you were never broken. You were being rebuilt. Quietly. Carefully. Completely. And what you've built now, that's untouchable. Not because you're hiding, but because you're whole. And wholeness doesn't chase. It attracts. Wholeness doesn't explain. It exists. Wholeness doesn't ask for closure. It creates its own peace. You are no longer a character in someone else's drama. You are the author of your own narrative. And that narrative is not written in desperation or regret. It's written in resilience. In strength. In stoic clarity. You've stopped asking who you were to them. And started asking who you are to yourself. That question, that identity, is the foundation of everything going forward. Let them wonder. Let them scroll. Let them sit with the version of you they discarded. Because now you sit with peace. With purpose. With the unshakable knowing that you are no longer at the mercy of someone else's love, attention, or approval. You belong to yourself now. Fully. Fiercely. Finally. And that is what makes them panic.